Well, camp starts tomorrow. Yesterday we had the everything you need to know, right? And that was sort of facts and figures, not a lot of opinion, analysis type of stuff. Just running down the numbers. We messed up on the returning starters. Obviously, they have a returning starter, a defensive end, and Jimmy Scott. I talked about Jimmy Scott because if he's the leader in sacks among the defensive ends last season, and obviously he's coming back and he'd be a returning starter at defensive end. I don't know why I would have said that they need two new starting defensive ends. They only need one. Jimmy Scott presumably will be one of the others. And so those transfers will figure in there somehow. So we covered that yesterday, returning starters, production, things like that, and we wrote about it on Panther-Lair.com. You can go over to the site, the Pitt site on the 24/7 Sports Network, and see kind of the rundown of what Pitt's bringing back. Obviously, we know they have a starting quarterback, starting running back, etc., two starting wide receivers and all that. But what about production-wise? How much of their passing yards, their rushing yards? Obviously, Eli Holstein's injury caused some of those passing yard, the percentage of returning passing yardage to probably be lower than you would expect when you've got a starting quarterback returning. But we got all those numbers on Panther-Lair.com yesterday. We talked about it here on the Morning Pitt yesterday. Today it's bigger picture. It's like the top 5 storylines. I think storylines is what I'm going with here. It's sort of 5 big questions, 5 big storylines, 5 keys to the season, the 5 things. This is the 5 things about Pitt football in 2025 that when I think about it, when I boil it down, I get past some of the, hyper-specific things that we obviously spend a lot of time with on Panther-Lair.com and just kind of look at this team. What's at stake in 2025? What do they need to do? What are the big storylines around this team? I got 5, and I'm going to lay them on you today. Let's do it. The Tuesday edition of the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, it's a Tuesday edition of the Morning Pitt here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com. You see the website below, Panther-Lair.com, the Pitt site on the 24/7 Sports Network. The most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet. Pitt football, Pitt basketball, Pitt recruiting. Find everything there at Panther-Lair.com and message boards to talk about it with other Pitt fans. All day, every day, Pitt fans are hanging out on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. And then our YouTube channel right here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. We have all the Pitt video content you can possibly handle or ask for. These daily morning Pitt videos, Monday through Friday. Our weekly live show that we do every Wednesday night at 8:30 p.m. We'll have press conferences, post-game shows, interviews, practice videos, all kinds of stuff. And particularly with training camp starting tomorrow, we are going to have a ton of video content for you right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So make sure you like this video and subscribe, and then you won't miss any of our Pitt video content right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. All right, 5 big storylines, 5 keys to the season, 5 things about Pitt football that I think are important this year. And the number one thing, like one of the things, and this just sort of has been dawning on me over the last couple of days, because it takes everything we've said for the last 8 months into consideration and boils it down to what matters for 2025. And it's this, okay? 2024, obviously tremendous disappointment. Start off 7-0 and then lose the next 6 games. But that season had built-in, baked-in excuses. And you can call them excuses, you can call it rationalizations, whatever you want to call it. It was very easy, and it is very easy to look back at last season and say, well, look, 6-game losing streak, finishing 7-6 after starting 7-0, big-time bummer, major disappointment. But if Eli Holstein stays healthy, if Branson Taylor stays healthy, if they avoid some of those injuries, there's no way they go 7-6. They go 9-3 in the regular season, or they go 10-2 or something like that, and they end up winning 10 or 11 games. And so it's very easy to kind of brush it off. And yeah, you could get down in the weeds. You could talk about why were they so unprepared on that 3rd and goal or whatever it was against Clemson. Why were they, why did they execute so poorly against Virginia? Why did they keep losing to freaking Boston College? Like you can, and not to mention the bowl game. I mean, you can second guess all kinds of things in that game, from the decision in overtime to, from the first decision of the game, which is starting David Lynch instead of Julian Duggar, all the way to the final decision of the game, which, not going for 2 in that situation, trying to end the game in the 4th overtime or whatever it was. So, I mean, you can get in the weeds and really find a lot of details that are questionable decisions and things that maybe don't get brushed off as easily by that injury question. But if you pull back a little bit, you can say, all right, that sucked. That was a bad one. But they had all those injuries, and just, boy, if they just didn't have those injuries, that would have been a really good season. Well, you're entering 2025 with a healthy Eli Holstein, with a healthy offensive line. You've addressed a lot of your personnel issues from a year ago. You've got all these players back healthy. If you want to sell us on 2024 being wrecked by injuries, then you better succeed when all of those players are good to go. Okay? If you don't want us to dwell too much on bad decisions, bad execution, bad preparation, which led to a bunch of those losses in the final 6 games. If you want us to stay focused on just, well, it was the injuries, now that those players are healthy, you better go win some games. It better work out, because those rationalizations and excuses ring a little more hollow if you go out here in 2025 with a full, healthy, roster, or at least healthy players at important positions. You're going to have injuries. But if you keep the quarterback healthy and you keep the offensive line largely intact and you still only go 7-5, well, not only is that sort of damning for the 2025 season, but it kind of takes away some of those excuses and rationalizations from 2024 where you say, well, maybe it wasn't just the injuries. Maybe it was a bunch of other things that you guys screwed up as well. And so there's a lot riding on this season right here, not just for how we look at this season, but also what we think about the 2024 season. Because if Pitt goes out and wins a bunch of games this year, then we can look back and be like, oh man, imagine what 24 could have been if they'd stayed healthy, and we can set aside all those questions and, more acute criticisms and just say, well, it was mostly the injuries. But if this season doesn't go that way, then it's going to call a lot of that into question. And I think this is important. Because we have spent the bulk of the offseason, the last 8 months, talking about those injuries and how they affected the season. And every time somebody asks, well, how did they go, 7-0 and then 0-6? You know what I mean? If I'm on the radio or doing different, guest hits or whatever it is, podcasts, things like that. I mean, we always talk about the injuries. That's the first thing we talk about. And we just kind of keep the focus right there. Well, you got everybody healthy now. What it is. The next thing, and this is something that's sort of important every year for every team, and I think it's certainly the case for Pitt this year, is that the stars have to be stars. I think when you look at the guys who are really being trumpeted as the star players for this 2025 Pitt team, the returning players, the guys who really were the biggest performers last year, you're by and large talking about guys who have kind of done it for 1 year. Desmond Reed, some history at the FCS level, but last year was the first year that he played at the Power 5 level, Power 4 level, the ACC level, and succeeded at the Power 4 level. You know what I mean? Kyle Lewis, Rasheem Biles, Eli Holstein, even if we want to throw him into that group. You're talking about guys who not necessarily coming back from 2 or 3 years of strong performances, but they had their breakout year last year. And that's great, and there's no reason to doubt that they'll be able to continue that, but it does need to happen. And I think it is worth mentioning that it needs to happen. Like, we can and do and will take it as a given that Desmond Reed's going to play at a really high level, and Kyle Lewis is going to play at a really high level, and Rasheem Biles is going to play at a really high level, and to a lesser extent, but still with some amount of confidence, that Eli Holstein's going to play at a really high level. Okay. And they certainly did last year. Now they need to live up to those expectations, because a lot of what Pitt does and a lot of what Pitt plans to do and a lot of what will make Pitt successful is all riding on those guys, not only those guys, but largely those guys really having success, matching and or exceeding the success that they had in 2024. And I think it's important. Your stars got to be stars. You know what I mean? Anybody who plays fantasy football knows this. Like, your studs have to be studs, right? And any team is going to have to rely on its big-time players to make big-time plays in big-time games, right? Well, these are the big-time players. Those 4 guys that I mentioned. They got to be up to the task. They got to, like I said, match and or exceed what they did a year ago. The third thing is kind of the opposite of that. Instead of talking about the guys who played really well last year, the strengths of the team last year, we're talking about the weaknesses. And this is, every team needs to improve its weaknesses from year to year. In 2025, that means getting the transfers who can step in and fill some of those holes. And so it's sort of twofold with, did you improve your weaknesses, and, were you successful in your efforts to do so? And obviously the efforts to do so were very specific and direct by the Pitt coaching staff this offseason. They needed to improve the offensive line. They needed to improve the defensive ends. So they took 3 at each of those positions. They took 3 receivers as well. They lost one of those guys. So you could say that was maybe that was a priority or focus for the Pitt staff, but I don't think it was on the level of the offensive line and the defensive ends. Those 2 position groups needed to get a lot better this offseason. I like the players they've added, all 6. All 3 offensive linemen and all 3 defensive ends have experience, varying degrees. Jaden Moore, the defensive end from Oregon, probably has the least experience out of those 6 guys, but he also might have the highest ceiling. So, you balance that out a little bit, but you've got experienced players. You've got guys who've been around, who've played a decent amount, some of them coming from the Power 4 level, some from G5, some from FCS. You're drawing from a bunch of different areas, but you found guys who seem like they should be able to fit in there. And that's going to be key. Just like you need your stars to step up, answer the call, you also need to have improved your weaknesses from a year ago. And we'll find out about that. I could look at it and be like, well, yeah, Blaine Spires played a whole lot at Utah State and Bowling Green before that. Looks like a experienced veteran guy. Same with Joey Zielinski. Played a lot at Eastern Michigan. Not all that productive, but an experienced veteran guy. He's been on the field a lot. Should be able to transition into this defense. Jaden Moore, like I said, maybe the highest ceiling out of any of the defensive ends on the roster. Kendall Stanley, he's been a starter at right tackle. They'll play him on the other side this year, but still, Keith Gouvet played a lot at Richmond. He's got experience. Jeff Percy never really started in Michigan, but he's played. I can sit here and talk about it. We can look at the bona fides and the credentials and the resumes, but we actually got to see them go out there starting a month from tomorrow and play and do their jobs, I should say. Because if the coaches got it wrong, and I think you could say that they didn't do a great job addressing the defensive end position last year out of the transfer portal, if they have similar levels of success, what they got out of Nate Matlack, David Ojebwe, and Chief Borders was 6 sacks total out of all 3 of those transfers that they brought in. If they get that level of production out of the defensive ends they brought in this year, and sort of the equivalent level of production or quality of play out of the offensive linemen they brought in this year, it's not going to be a very good year. They need more out of this year's transfers on the lines than they got out of last year's transfers. And for that, we'll have to wait and see. The fourth thing, new starters. Every year you're going to have new starters. They have one fewer new starter than I thought, than I said yesterday. They don't need a starter at defensive end, but they still need a new starter at one of the wide receiver positions. They need a new starter at tight end, new starter at left tackle, left guard, one of the defensive end spots, middle linebacker, cornerback, safety. And at some of these spots, particularly on defense, there's this kind of hand-waving of, I think they're going to be fine. And I do. I think they're going to be fine with Cruz Brookins. I think they're going to be fine with Shadarian Harrison if he steps into that starting job. And maybe it'll be Tamon Lynham, who played a lot last year. I think they're going to be fine. Braylon Lovelace at middle linebacker. I think they're going to be fine. The other defensive end spot, it's going to be one of the transfers. I think they're going to be fine. Left tackle, left guard, wide receiver, tight end, all this stuff. I think they're going to be fine. But we need to actually see it happen. I have every bit of confidence in the world to believe in Cruz Brookins. I really do. I think he's going to be really good. I think he's going to make a lot of plays. I think he's going to put up a lot of good stats. I think he's going to be a good player for Pitt. I have every reason to believe that Braylon Lovelace is going to be a good middle linebacker. I really do. I think they'll be super solid up the middle. I think the defensive tackles will be good, the middle linebacker will be good, and the safeties will be good. Obviously, the outside linebackers too. But with what we're talking about right here of strength up the middle. But the reality is, Braylon Lovelace, even though he had a really productive season last year, 10.5 tackles for loss, he ended up as like the 5th leading tackler on the team despite playing in a reserve role, although he had a handful of starts. I mean, we still need to see him do it for like 600 snaps or 500 snaps over the course of a full season. Even though Lovelace and Brookins, I'm bought in on those guys. I think they're going to be really good. I believe it. It needs to actually come to fruition. Same way with the transfers at defensive end, left tackle, left guard. Tight end, whatever. Wide receiver, another guy's going to have to step up there. Who's it going to be? I don't know. That's going to be a big question mark. But with some of these starters, and we do this every year, there's a guy who's in a reserve role, who's stepping into a starting job, and I use the phrase we hand wave it away. And we do. But it still needs to happen. You know what I mean? And so this is going to be a storyline for every team every year. I mean, some of these things are storylines for every team every year. Your stars have to be stars. You need to have improved your weaknesses. And, your new starters, even if they're guys that you have a fair amount of confidence in, have to step in and actually do the job. Those are 3 things that every team is going to have to address those. That's going to be a storyline for every team every year. And it's certainly the case for Pitt. Now, there are a couple of things that are a little more unique to Pitt, like I talked about, the excuses from last season, the rationalization from last season, and how this season is the opportunity to prove that those excuses and rationalization were well placed. And the other thing that I think is, at least unique for Pitt this year, or specific to Pitt this year, and, my 5th sort of storyline here is, it's time for Pat Narduzzi to get it done again. Yeah, I mean, it's time for Pat Narduzzi to have another legitimately good season. Because 2021 was a long time ago. And 2022, good season. I mean, you finished 9-4, it's a good season. But look, that wasn't the first 9-4 season in recent Pitt history that had a bit of a had left people with a mixed feeling. And everybody was excited. This is funny because it speaks to a phenomenon that I've pointed out many times. Everybody was excited after 2022 because they won the Sun Bowl, and the way they won the Sun Bowl. That helps. That creates a great vibe for the offseason. You roll the clock back 14 years to 2008. They also went 9-4. They went to the Sun Bowl, but they lost that game 3-0. Okay? And it was an entirely different vibe that offseason. After the 2008 season. Even though that team won 9 games in the regular season, they went 9-4 just like the team in 2022 did. They didn't have a miserable month of October like the 2022 team did. They had their hiccups and bad games. But that 2008 team also went on the road and beat a top 10 South Florida team on a Thursday night. They went out to Notre Dame and won in a bunch of overtimes. They beat West Virginia for the 2nd year in a row. They had some highlights that year. They had lowlights like losing to Bowling Green and losing to Rutgers. But it ended on that Sun Bowl in 2008, and it created bad vibes for the entire postseason, even though it was a 9-4 season. Dave Wanstead's most successful year to date. Year 4, he finally had a winning record. Fast forward to 2022, they go 9-4. And everybody's pretty excited, and I think it's because of the way that Sun Bowl went. But ultimately, that was a team that underachieved. They lost to Georgia Tech like a week after they fired Jeff Collins, or the week they fired Jeff Collins. They shouldn't have lost that game. They shouldn't have lost to Louisville, in which case, those 2 games would have made them 10-2 in the regular season, with a loss to Tennessee and a loss at North Carolina. And I'm pretty sure that would have put them in the ACC championship game, regardless of the North Carolina game. If they win those 2 winnable games, Georgia Tech and Louisville, they're back in the ACC championship game for the 2nd year in a row. And so with a certain kind of context or certain amount of context, 2022 feels a little less like the good to great season that it's been made out to be. And my point is, there's 2021. There are those first couple years when they went 8-5. And actually, let's just go recent history. Let's not talk about those first 6 years from 2015 through 2020. 2021, they win the ACC. Great season by any measure. Even if it had some hiccups. Great season. You won the conference championship. 2022, they go 9-4. should have won 10 games in the regular season. 2023, they go 3-9. 2024, they go 7-6. I'm not saying that you should only have one good season every 4 years. I'm not saying that, well, it's been 3 years since your last really good season, but it has been 3 years since your last really good season. You're entering year 11 with this coaching staff, with this administration of the football program. It's time to go win some games. It's time to minimize the clunkers to maybe one in the season. And it's time to not only win the games you're supposed to win, but steal a game or two that maybe you're not supposed to win. Maybe Florida State, maybe Notre Dame, maybe Louisville, whatever it might be. And don't blow games against Boston College. Take care of business in the backyard brawl. Put together a legitimately good to great season. You're due for that. It's time for that. And that is maybe one of the biggest storylines of the season. And one of the biggest questions, can Pitt have another truly great season? And it might not mean going 12-0 and getting a playoff spot or something like that. But you should be legitimately in competition for a spot in the ACC championship game. And if you're not, in year 11, with the amount of personnel and roster building that's happened over the past few years, if you haven't built this thing into a winner, I think you have to look at process at that point and start asking yourself, why is the success not coming like it should? We're getting way ahead of ourselves. We're already asking those questions about a season that hasn't even happened yet, and trying to adjudicate the or render a verdict on a disappointing season that hasn't even unfolded. I think this team has plenty of pieces and opportunities to make this a successful season. Need to go out and do it. All right. Training camp starts tomorrow. We'll have our final camp preview tomorrow morning on the Morning Pitt, and then we'll have lots of video coverage from Pitt football's first day of training camp in the South Side. The practice in the morning. Pat Narduzzi will talk at 1. We'll talk to a bunch of assistant coaches and players after that, and it'll all be right here at Panther-Lair.com, at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, and on the website, Panther-Lair.com. So like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com so you don't miss any of our Pitt video content. Thanks for watching today. I hope your week's off to a great start. Enjoy your Tuesday. We'll catch up with you tomorrow for the first day of training camp in the Morning Pitt right here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.